Well, thank you all for being with us. As Wendy reminded us when she joined, today is May Day, and May Day is one of those celebrations. Kind of takes place all around the world, and in different cultures, it has a different mythology or a different story that goes with it. And as I talked a few weeks ago when I was talking about the mythologies, as one culture came in contact with another, they tried to keep the holiday but change the symbolism to suit their new theology. But May Day is simply halfway between the solstice and the equinox. So we've gone through the spring equinox. We're coming to the summer solstice, and we're about halfway in between. An important celestial event, easy for the people who kept track of the sun to know when it had occurred, and still a time of fertility, a time of growth, a time of celebration. The crops are in the field and everything's starting to grow now, and people are celebrating it. So even in the simple things, and especially in the simple things, if we will stop, if we will get the clutter out of our brains, if we will get the busyness out of our lives for just a little while, we can sense the presence and the activity of the divine in that which seems ordinary. Right? The calving of the animals, the growth, the growth of the vegetables in the garden. Little things, little things. And that's what we want to talk about today. Last week we talked about prayer, and we worked from Rocco Errico's book, Setting a Trap for God. And the vision, or the image that we hopefully took away, is kind of someone who is sitting in the woods with a snare, and they're waiting for something to come along so they can catch it. Or someone who's fishing on the side of the creek, and they've got their line out in the water, they've got their bobber out in the water. The hook with the bait is hanging below, and they're paying attention. They're alert. Remember, one of the definitions of prayer was a still alertness. A still alertness. So think of the fisherman. The fisherman has done everything that's required and is now in a state of still alertness or still awareness, watching that bobber for the slightest sign that there's a fish nibbling at the bait. So what we were doing, what we discussed last week, what we were doing is, in our prayer, in our treatment work, in our meditation, in our spiritual practice, in our mindfulness, what we are doing is we are attuning our consciousness, directing it to be aware of the presence that is already here, that is already within, that is already without. It is everywhere presence. And we expect the experience of the presence. We accept the divine guidance through intuition. We expect that there is that which is here, nearer than our hands and feet, closer than our breath, that knows us, that loves us, that guides us, that cares for us. And it is this divine contact, this, as Dr. Holmes called it, this conscious awareness of our contact with the divine presence. It is this experience of the divine that actually produces the change within us, opens us up a little bit more, allows us to experience a little bit more of God, allows us to see a little bit more of the good. And what we want to do today is we want to kind of follow up on that. The title of the talk is, well, don't overthink it. Don't overthink it. Don't make it so hard. Don't try to analyze it. Don't try to weigh it. Don't try to measure it. Don't overthink it. And we tend to do this in our society. We tend to, first of all, make things more difficult than they need to be. And we tend to kind of overthink things. We worry about things. things. We constantly go back and question our decisions. We wonder if there's another way or a better way to do things. And for a time in my career, I was a project manager. And basically you take a design project and you lay out all the little steps that are required to get you from beginning to end, and you put them in the right sequence on your flow charts. And then you go and meet with all the different design teams that are responsible for delivering the little piece parts of the project, and you basically, it's like spinning the plates. The guy in the circus that's spinning the plates. You just basically keep going around trying to keep everything moving and keep everything on track. So one day a miracle occurs and your project delivers. And I was at a seminar up in Arlington, Virginia, excuse me, and would take the shuttle bus. I would take the shuttle bus. The hotel had a shuttle that would go over to the metro station at the Pentagon, the tubes. And also in the hotel were two project managers for the government, and they were working on building a new type of aircraft, a new type of helicopter. That was their project. And I could hear them talking. They were sitting right in front of me in the bus, and they were talking. And just from the language they were using, I knew that they were project managers. And they were talking about something that we in that field we called creeping elegance. You'd have the vision of what this project looks like when it's finished, and you go and you start and you lay your plans and you start to implement. And no sooner do you do that, and somebody comes along and says, well, I think it would be better if we added this to it, or I think it would be better if we added that to it, or perhaps if we did. And it's called elegance creep. So what happens is you start out with this kind of vision that what you're going to build is a Volkswagen car, something very simple and something very serviceable. And by the time you're done, it's a Cadillac pickup truck. So the project managers had to guard against that, because you'd never get done. You'd never get done. And one of them one day said, sometimes you just have to go and shoot all the engineers and go ahead and build it according to the plan, which means, stop all the new ideas from coming in. People overthink it. You overthink it and you never get done. You're always in the stage of thinking about it, but you're never in the stage of completing it, of getting it done. And we do this. We do this in our society. I'm going to talk a little bit about the reasons we do it and how it affects our spiritual growth. Now, one of the things that we learn, if you've ever read Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, is to always start with the end in mind. Start with the end in mind. What does this look like when we're done? Where is it that we're trying to get to? And if you understand where it is that you're trying to go, what it is that you're trying to do, then you can kind of go back and look at all of the different steps you're trying to take to get there and say, well, does this step really get me where I want to go, or is this step taking me, sidetracking me somewhere? And that's probably a good idea if you're building something, if you're doing something that has a very definite end point. But it gets a little bit more nebulous when you have something that it has no definite end point, like life. What is the purpose of life? What is it that we're doing in life? What is the end point? And we come to realize that, of course, life is eternal. Life has no end. We may have, as Goldsmith says, our parentheses in eternity, our beginning and our ending of this particular life and this particular body. But life itself never begins nor ends, and we are part of that. So we just change. We're constantly changing from one experience to another, from one state of being to another. And if you look at life in that big picture, then you guess, well, what is there an end point? Is there a goal? Is there something that I'm moving towards? And in that respect, I like to think, instead of having a goal, of having a vision. So a vision is never complete. A vision is always something that we're becoming. So the vision is, what is it we are becoming together? If you're working on a team, what is the vision is, what is it we're becoming together? If you're contemplating a relationship, if you're going into a marriage, for example, what is it that we're becoming together, and how does this marriage help us to become that together? You know, are we becoming something together that the marriage helps us to grow into? And the importance of this vision is it's a guiding principle. Whenever you start to to have to question things or make a decision between one thing or another thing, should I do this, should I not do that? See, then we start to say, well, which of the options helps us to more completely fulfill our vision? What is it that we're becoming together? How does this help us to accomplish that? So if we think of that in terms of our individual life, you know, what is it that we're becoming? What is it that we are to do, or to be, or to experience? And I think for now, for our level of understanding now, we might consider that our vision is that daily, we are becoming more aware of the presence of the divine. That's the simplest way that I can put it, you know. What is the purpose of religion? It means to bind together, but what is it binding together, you know? What is it that we're doing? And what we're doing is we are closing this gap that exists only in consciousness but not in reality. This gap that makes us believe that there's a divine somewhere far away, and then there's us down here on this little blue marble circling the sun. And if you think about our spiritual practices, our prayer, our meditation, our visualization, our affirmations, our education, our studying, our reading, listening to tapes, listening to talks like this, these kind of things, all of them, to some degree, are helping us to let go of every and any idea of separation or limitation. To put it in the simplest terms I can put it is if you think about the way that what we call the Bible is laid out. It starts out with the book of Genesis, and Adam and Eve representing the essence of what we are. Adam and Eve are one with the divine. And then there's this act of separation. They leave the garden. And of course there's the two cherubim there, and you have the same symbolism in Buddhism. You have the two guards guarding the gate. And they leave and they go and they wander and they have these experiences in the world, you know, the experiences of the knowledge of good and the knowledge of evil. They have these experiences, but all the time what they're trying to do is they're trying to get back into the garden. That's what we're all trying to do. We're trying to get back into the garden. And in order to do that, we have to pass the two guards. We have to get by the fear, and we have to get by the ego. And then we can enter the garden. And then, of course, what we find is we never really left. We never really left. We only thought we left. It was a leaving in consciousness only. And that, of course, is the last book of the Bible, is the book of the Revelation, the book of the realization that the Christ, the individualized presence of God, the Christ, is right here where we are, and that we can experience it. So our vision of what we are becoming in this experience, this eternal experience of life, is we are becoming more aware, but aware through experience, not aware through somebody else telling me about it, aware through experience of the presence of the divine right here, of our unity, of our oneness. What we are becoming is one. We are becoming one with everything. So the title of today's talk is Don't Overthink It. Don't overthink it, because we tend to make this too hard. Dr. Holmes tells us we have made a riddle of simplicity. We look too hard and too far away for God. But the farmer can sense the presence of the divine in the field. So the mother can sense the presence of the divine when she's holding her baby in her arms. When we hold our beloved, when we gaze into their eyes, you see, it's in the simple things. It's in the very simple things. And if we make it too hard, if we make it too difficult, we will miss it. We will miss it. And this is why we're told in different teachings. In Christianity, we're told, unless you come to me as a little one, as a child, you won't find the kingdom. You won't find it. Unless you come to the presence of the divine, the Christ, the presence of the divine, unless you come to it with a childlike, not a childish, but a childlike attitude, you'll miss it. In Zen, we're told we must have the Zen mind, or the beginner's mind. And again, in the New Testament, we're told, blessed are the poor in spirit, for they shall see God. And that doesn't make sense to us, We think of somebody who's poor in spirit as somebody who's worn out and tired and has no energy. That's not what it means at all. So if we look at the three levels of consciousness, Emmett Curtis Hopkins talks of it as being the material, the mental, and the spiritual or the metaphysical. I call it level 1, 2, and 3. It's called different things in different cultures and by different teachers. But I'd like you to think of it as being the ego, the intellect, and the spirit. And they're in ascending order. So our first experiences of life very much surround the ego. Then as we mature, our experiences surround the intellect. And then as we grow spiritually, our experiences are of the soul, of our unity, of our oneness, of just being. So the soul wants to be. The soul just wants to be. It already is, but it wants to realize its isness, its oneness, its beingness. Right? So this is the epitome of what the Bible is telling us when it says, "Be still and know." Be still and know. We are sitting with alertness. We are sitting with awareness. Now, when we learn how to meditate, our meditation focuses on external objects. But eventually we learn that consciousness itself is an object of meditation. Pure consciousness aware of itself. Pure consciousness. At night we fall asleep, and when we fall asleep we become unconscious. Right? There's part of us that must still be operating. I mean, if the baby cries or there's a noise or something like that, or something tells us get out of that bed, something stirs us. But for the most part, we don't remember. We are not aware of what's going on. We are not, kind of not there. Our body is asleep. Our brain is asleep. Consciousness is still functioning, but we're not aware. It's below our level of consciousness. And yet, if we learn how to meditate, we can get into a state of being aware that the body is asleep, being aware that the brain is asleep, and just being aware that we are aware. Just being aware that we are aware. Pure consciousness aware of itself. And in that condition, as the brain starts to dream, we are aware that the experience is a dream. If you get up and you leave your house and you go to the movies, you're aware that you've gone into a movie theater and the movie's starting to play. After a half hour of commercials, finally the movie plays. But you're aware that what you're seeing is a movie. And if you as your body and your brain shut down into sleep, if your consciousness maintains awareness that it is, why then as the dream arises, you're aware that the dream has arisen. You're aware that it is a drama. It is a play that is playing out. So pure consciousness aware of itself. That is the vision of what we are becoming. Pure consciousness aware of itself. And if we back down one level, if we come out of that spiritual metaphysical level 3 and we back down one level, we get to the intellect level, we see we see why it is so difficult for us to have that level 3 experience of just suchness. The Buddhists call it suchness, isness, I amness, beingness. And the intellect, our logic, our reason, our ability to think, to analyze, it's always going. It's always going. And what the intellect tries to do is, rather than see and experience the unity and the oneness in everything, the intellect tries to analyze and divide and separate things and categorize them and put them into little pigeonholes, so we can say, oh, you know, everything, all the blue goes here and all the red goes there and the gray goes in the middle. And we like to try to name things, to have dominion, as Genesis says. We like to try to have dominion over things. We name them. And we mistakenly believe that if we have named it, we know everything that there is to know about it. And in fact, we may know nothing about it other than the name that we have given to it. And you'll see this a lot in terms of public debate. You know, the political cycle is a good cycle for observing human nature and seeing what goes on. And if people don't like something, they label it. They label it with a negative label. And from that point on, they never talk about the thing, they talk about the negative label. You know, well, that's just socialism. And they kind of take whatever that idea was, and they have just labeled it with a word that has a negative connotation in it. And everybody just dismisses it. Everybody who doesn't want to believe it, they just dismiss it. And they say, oh yeah, well that's that. And we don't want to be that. I had as I was looking back on it, I had kind of a gift from an English teacher in high school. I went to a parochial high school, and we were taught by the Christian brothers. And these were men who had taken religious vows. They were not priests. They didn't say mass or administer the sacraments or things like that. But they lived in a building together, and their ministry, if you want to call it that, was teaching young boys, which I think, you know, look back and say, why would anybody want to do that? But they did, and they didn't get paid very much, $100 a month or something. They got their room and board, and they dedicated their time to educating young men, to teaching us. And in our English class, our English teacher was trying to really get us to think, really get us to go outside the box and to not just take labels. So he would have us take a controversial topic or word, and he would give us the assignment to go out and to come back and defend it, to make a presentation and tell everybody what was so good about this thing. And of course, this was the early 60s. Communism was the big threat. The Cold War was going on, and I drew out of the, you know, you had to draw your topics out of the box, and the topic I drew was communism. So now, here I was growing up in a blue collar neighborhood. Everything was, you know, our country right or wrong was the attitude, and suddenly I had to go and find out what was good about communism. And now this is before the internet, so this was kind of going to the encyclopedia and trying to find everything you could in the old Funkin' Wagnalls that Mom got from A&P, you know. And as I started to get into it, what I realized is that, well, all of the brothers who taught in that school were practicing communists. They were living in a commune, in a building attached to the school. They didn't have any material possessions, or very little material possessions of their own. And they were all working towards the common good, the vision that they had bought into, which is the, you know, educating young men. That was what their life was dedicated to. So that was you had like a 4 or 5 minute talk you had to give, and that was the context of my talk, was that, you know, communism in itself is not bad. It may be different manifestations of it that are not so good, but in itself, you know, it's not bad. Just look at these brothers who are giving their lives to teaching us. And of course, sucking up to the teacher always helps. So I got a good grade on the talk. But my point is that we have to go beyond the labels. See, we have to be able to think about what we're thinking about rather than to just take something and label it and put it off to the side and those kind of things. So our intellect is constantly doing that. It's constantly taking things, it's labeling them, it's putting them off to the side, but it really doesn't understand them. It really doesn't know anything about them. But that's what it seems to be geared to do. The intellect wants to be right. It wants to analyze. It wants to divide things instead of putting things together. And it wants to put them into little boxes. And you say to yourself, well, how does that help me to have the experience of unity? And it doesn't. While we're doing it, while we're engaged in the practice of weighing and analyzing and measuring and categorizing and putting things in boxes, we're not experiencing the unity. We're caught up in our thoughts. We're overthinking. We're caught up in our mind. So our mind is just flitting here and there and everywhere. And this is why we have to learn to meditate. This is why we have to learn to be still and to know. We have to let that chatter go on, but not be distracted by it. So the intellect, the purpose of the intellect as we go through it, is the intellect can help us to understand at an intellectual level that there is a state of being that occurs before the intellect, before perception and judgment. There is awareness. There is original awareness. We can call it that. So you can imagine just awakening and just being aware of your surroundings. There's light in the room. Birds are singing. The temperature is cool. I'm laying down. I can feel gravity. All of this is just awareness. And then all of a sudden, the intellect kicks in, the mind kicks in and says, oh my God, it's daylight. I must be late for my appointment. The birds are singing. I thought it was going to be raining today and I wasn't going to have to cut the grass, and now I've got to cut the grass because and the mind gets going, and the mind gets going. But the intellect can lead us to at least the understanding, if not the experience, at least the understanding that there is something that an awareness, a state of awareness, a state of beingness that precedes thought. So this is the razor's edge. You know the movie The Razor's Edge. There's one with Bill Murray and the first one with Tyrone Power, which I like better, by the way. We use the intellect to bring us to a point beyond the intellect. That's the razor's edge, and it's easy to fall off because we can get so entangled in our thoughts. We can get so caught up in our thoughts. What do I know about God? What did this religion say about God? What does that religion say about God? What does the other religion say about God? Is there even a God? How would we know there's a God? Yada, yada, boom, boom. And our mind just keeps going and going and going. And yet there's a part of us that we need to say, shh, shh. Be still and know. Be still and know. So we understand then that trying to analyze God, trying to define God, right? The Hindus tell us neti neti, not this, not that. You can't analyze it. It is beyond your concepts. It is beyond. It doesn't mean that we can't know it. It means we can't know it intellectually. The intellect cannot grasp that which is beyond the intellect. The intellect can tell us that there's something beyond the intellect, but the intellect can't grasp it. To put it in terms of physics today, the physicists talk about the Big Bang. The Big Bang. The universe started the Big Bang. Everything that we know, everything was compressed into something, smaller than a golf ball, maybe the size of a pinhead, I don't know. And then all of a sudden, boom, there was something kicked the can, is the way I heard one physicist explain. Something kicked the can and everything just started to expand, and the universe as we know it came into being, and that was, 15 billion years ago or something like that. And as the physicist was going through this explanation, he said, now people want to know, what was it like at the very moment of the Big Bang? He said, we don't know. He said, we have no way of knowing, because at that moment, as far as we can project now, as far as we can kind of think how it might have been, at that moment, all of the laws of physics as we know them were not functioning yet. There's no way to measure. There's no way, to weigh, to touch, to feel. It was nothing. He says, and we can't know. It's beyond our ability to know. He says, and then people ask, well, what was there before the Big Bang? What kicked the can? He says, we have no way of knowing. We have no way of knowing. He says, our way of reasoning cannot even function in anything at or beyond the Big Bang. Our intellect can only take us so far in our discovery of the presence of God. Comes a time when we have to stop thinking. We have to start being. We have to start experiencing. So if we back up another level, we went back from the being, which is level 3, to the intellect, which is level 2. Now we're going into the ego, which is level 1. And the ego is just simply an idea that the intellect has. The ego is simply the intellect's opinion of who we are and the way things ought to be. Our moral judgment, our sense of right and wrong, our expectations of life. And the ego is more geared for struggle than it is for thinking. The ego is kind of our warrior or our battler or our protector. So the ego, to simplify it, think of it as it's constantly trying to make sure we stay alive. And it does that by perceiving almost everything as a threat and figuring out how it is that we're going to do battle with this threat. Something arises and we immediately figure out, well, here's how I'm going to go win this win this battle. You get a letter in the mail from a creditor or something, and they've made a mistake, and they tell you that if you don't make this payment, they're going to come take your car away. And you made the payment. You've got the receipt. Now you're going to call them up and you're going to give them a piece of your mind. Your ego is going to do battle with them. And sometimes it doesn't even matter. If you call the people up and say, hey, I got this letter in the mail and there's some kind of a mistake. I went ahead and made the payment. I've got a receipt. And the customer service rep on the other end says, oh, I'm so sorry. I apologize for that. Apparently the letter went out the day before the payment was received. Just ignore it. We're not satisfied with that. The ego is not satisfied with that. The ego still wants to give them a hard time. I was on the other end of that phone for many years in a call center, so I know. So people say, do you know what you do? You made a mistake and yada yada yada, and a lot of times they get down to, and I want you to give me something free because of all my trouble. But the ego has that need. The ego has that desire to battle, and it perceives things as a threat. And we have to ask ourselves then, well, how does that help me? How does that help me to experience the oneness, to experience the beingness? Because the ego has us separated from everything. It has us separated from everyone. Like the old saying, the only two people I trust are you and me, and I'm not so sure about you. So the ego has even a greater division. It's kind of, our natural stance is not to trust. I used to love when I was doing executive coaching, and the new executives would come in and we would talk about building trust, that they need to build trust with the organization. And they would say, well, what have I done that they don't trust me? They should trust me until I do something that tells them I'm not trustworthy. And I would say, yeah, well, that's nice, but it don't work that way. The natural instinct is don't trust. Don't trust until you do something that makes me believe you, makes me trust you. That's the way the ego is. The ego is very, very wary. So it's looking at everything, it's analyzing everything, it's judging everything, and it's perceiving everything as a threat, and it kind of puts them into, this is a real threat, this is a maybe threat, and this one I just keep my eye on it. And only slowly does it take things into trust. So here we are, and by the way, you want to know, well, if that's what it does, what's the point of it? Well, from the point of view of evolution, it kept us alive. It kept us alive long enough for us to awaken to the intellect. Right? And it keeps us alive long enough for the intellect to tell us, well, the intellect isn't the end all and be all, that there's something else. There's the soul, you see. So there were kind of necessary phases in development. But if we hold on to them for too long, you see, if we hold on to them after they've served their purpose, they hold us back. In Buddhism, they give us the example, if you had to cross a river and you built a raft, and you built this raft out of logs, and you paddled across the river, and when you got to the other side, you would leave the raft there and you would continue on your journey. How ridiculous would it be to pick the raft up and strap it to your back and start walking inland with this raft, and everybody you meet, you tell them the story of your raft and how you built it yourself, and it served its purpose. Let it go. Let it go. Don't overthink it. Don't make it so hard. So we have to understand that the ego has a place and the intellect has a place, but their place is to help us to fulfill our vision of what it is that we are becoming. And what we are becoming is more deeply aware of our conscious contact with the divine. So this brings us back then to the Zen mind, the beginner's mind, the poor in spirit, and come to me like a little child. So the Zen mind, the beginner's mind, think about the first time you do something. Think of how aware you are of everything the first time you do something. Think of the first time that you got in a car to drive a car, How aware you were of your environment, of everything that was going on around you, of how the pedals felt under your foot, how the shift lever felt in the palm of your hand, how the steering wheel felt, and the amount of pushback you got on the steering wheel as you were going around the corner. You were keenly aware of everything. And then after a few years, you're zipping down the road and you got one hand on the wheel and you got the other hand, you got a cup of coffee, and you'll see all kinds of things on the highway, people putting on makeup, people sending text messages, people doing all sorts of things that they shouldn't be doing. See, they've lost that beginner's mind. They've lost that unique awareness of everything that was going on around them. Now again, this is part of life. This is part of evolution. We have an experience. We try to figure out what we need to know just to get by, And I'm not meaning in a slack-off way. I mean, we don't want to be thinking about things all the time. So we try to make them as automated or as routine as possible. And we relegate that down to our subconscious mind so our conscious mind can go on and learn new and different things. And this is why we have to learn mindfulness, see? We have to learn mindful meditation, mindfulness. We have to become aware. We have to become originally aware again of the things that we're doing, that we're engaged in, of the very life that we're living right now. See, most of the time we're not here now. We're living in the past, or we're living in the future, or we're sitting here thinking, boy, as soon as this is over, I'm going to go do this, I'm going to go do that, I'm going to do the other thing. And we're not here, and we're not now. And this is why the practice of mindfulness is so important. It brings us back to be originally aware. Can we go through our day being aware? Now, I'm not saying if you know how to do something that you go back and read the instructions every time you turn on the machine. I'm not talking about that at all. But can you be aware? Can you be aware of everything that's going on around you? And again, this is why in meditation, one of the techniques we're working with now is, can you be aware of breath, and can you be aware of heartbeat, and can you be aware of skin, and can you be aware of your environment, all at the same time. All at the same time. Not focusing on one and excluding the others, but all together. Can we bring it all in? And this is the Zen mind. This is the beginner's mind. We're told in Christianity, blessed are the poor in spirit, for they shall see God. And to me, it means something along the same lines. See, the poor in spirit don't have a preconceived notion about how it's going to be, how it ought to be, what has to be done in order to accomplish it. See, and many times we, through our process of ego and intellect, many times we develop an opinion or a prejudice. You know, for example, the prejudice of communism that I talked about as a boy growing up in high school. We all knew it was terrible, you know, that it was the worst thing in the world. Everybody told us so. None of us ever went to look to see if there was anything that could possibly be good about it. We have these built-in prejudices. We have these built-in ways of knowing that stop us from being aware, stop us from being aware. So if we are to experience the divine, we have to give up our preconceived notions. We have to give up our prejudices. And for many people, that's the hardest part. We want to be right? The intellect wants to be right. The ego wants to win, and the intellect wants to be right. And we want God to appear in our experience the way that we expect God to appear in our experience. And it may not be that way. It may not be that way at all. So we have to drop our preconceived notions. Now, Dr. Holmes tells us that instruction is good, and it is. Reading books is good. Listening to Sunday talks is good. All of these things are good. But at some point, when we reach that level 3, at some point we begin to be instructed by the very presence within. The very presence within. So here's an example. If I were to say to you, there's a presence and a power within you that knows what to do, and it can reveal to you what ought to be done. Sometimes there's a part of us that says, oh, well, we shouldn't listen to that. It could lead us astray. What if it's the devil that's talking to us and not God? And all of these other preconceived notions start to come to us that get in the way of our experiencing God. So we have to be poor in spirit. We have to let the divine reveal its sweet love to us in whatever way is appropriate for us at this time. And then this brings me back to the little children. I was thinking about this during the week. Now I realize that little children, especially when you raise them, that there are times when you'll find them, having each other in a headlock fighting over a toy, just both of them screaming, mine, mine, mine. That happens. That's part of growing up. But there's also the precious moments of the little child just being completely innocent, completely loving, completely accepting. You'll see two of them sitting on a bench with their arm on each other's shoulder. This is my buddy. This is my good buddy. And it doesn't matter whether it's two boys or a boy and a girl, or it just doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if one is short and one is tall. It doesn't matter. They're just two buddies, the best buddies. And if one is sad, the other one wants to be with them. The other one wants to be with them to cheer them up. If one of them's hurt, the other one's concerned. If one's licking on a lollipop, they'll stick it out and let the other one take a lick or two, and then they'll put it right back in their mouth, and they'll never stop and think, well, that person's got germs, and I shouldn't do this, and all the things that we know intellectually that separate us and divide us. They accept it as it is, and they experience the oneness, the unity. And this is what I think is meant in the New Testament when it says, unless you come as a child, you can't experience the kingdom. If you watch the stuff that goes on in the news, every once in a while, one religious faction or another will kind of get into putting down somebody else, and well, they're not going to go to heaven. They're going to go to hell. They're not going to go to heaven. It just reminded me, of the old joke about the guy that went to heaven, and St. Peter was showing him around. He says, now, if you go over in that direction over there, he says, you must never go over there. That's one part of heaven you can't go. And the guy says, well, he said, I won't go there, but I'm a little bit curious why I can't go there. And St. Peter said, well, that's the, and you can fill in the blank with your favorite denomination, part of heaven, and they think they're the only ones up here. Children, the innocence of the children that we're talking about, the childlike innocence, is not like that. Everyone's welcome. Everyone can come and share. Everyone can come to the barbecue in the backyard. You know? Fire up the grill and the kids are out in the street bringing in all their friends. Dad's got the grill going, you know. Come to me as a little child. So what we want to remember, hopefully if we remember anything out of this day, is don't overthink it. See, don't make it so hard. It's not a struggle. It has to be won. You don't you don't have to sit down and meditate and force yourself to stop thinking, because you're never going to do that anyway. And you're only going to bring yourself further away from your goal or from your vision or becoming one. Anything you fight against is going to occupy you. You're going to be consumed in the battle, you know, but you're never going to win. God is not an intellectual exercise. God is not a mathematical problem to be solved. And God is an experience to behold. So don't overthink it. Don't overthink it. Don't let your prejudices get between you and the divine, your experience of the divine. Any prejudices that we have are ultimately separating us from some part of God. It's only when we're willing to let those barriers down that we start to find the goodness that was there all along, to experience the oneness and the unity. And this is what is meant. Pray for your enemies. Bless them. Can you see the good there? Can you see that the presence of God must be right there where they are? Or are you willing to put a label on them? They're evil. They're evil. We'll put them in the evil box, and then we don't have to think about them ever again. They stick their head up, we'll, like whack-a-mole, we'll pop it back down. But we won't think about them. So I invite you this week, explore this day and this week with a childlike innocence, with a new mind, with a beginner's mind. Be poor in spirit and let go of your preconceived notions about how anything needs to turn out. And take your time on a daily basis, perhaps twice a day if you can. Take your time to just sit and be still. Nothing else. Just sit and be still. Don't analyze it. Don't think about what's happening. Don't think about what you need to be doing when you get done. Don't think about all of the things that you did during the day. Just be still. I love some of Joel Goldsmith's work. And he says sometimes we just need to be still and say, your servant is listening. And that's it. Your servant is listening. And then listen. You've set your trap. You're watching the bobber. You're expecting that the divine will reveal itself to you in some way. Your servant is listening. And if nothing happens, nothing happens. At the end of your 20 minutes, go back to your daily routine, but do it in awareness. Do it in mindfulness. Do it with a sense of appreciation and awe and oneness with everyone and everything around. And then later that evening, take your 20 minutes again and just sit. Your servant is listening. Remind yourself to be open. Remind yourself to be accepting. Remind yourself to be trusting. Remind yourself that you are completely immersed in and surrounded by the love of God. And if at any time you can't see it, that's not God's problem. That's yours. Don't overthink it. Don't make it more difficult than it needs to be. The experience of God is not just for the people who have years to go sit in a cave and stare at a blank wall, or go to a monastery and get degree upon degree upon degree in theology. They may be getting further away from the experience than the simple person who will just take time. Take time to trust. Take time to love. Take time to know. And like a small child excited to meet someone, excited to greet someone, excited to share whatever he or she has with someone. Let your consciousness bring itself to awareness of the presence of the divine, which is already here. In the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas, there's a line or a scene where one of the disciples, perhaps Thomas himself, asked Jesus, well, where is the kingdom? Right? Remember, Jesus was always talking about a kingdom within. He wasn't talking about a material kingdom. The presence of God. And Jesus' answer was, the kingdom is already here. It's everywhere present, but people do not see it. So our vision is to see it through experience, to feel our unity with it, to be one with it. And in order to do so, we have to stop struggling. And we have to stop overthinking. It's already here. It's already ours. We just need to come to it as a little child. And so it is.